Hi, it's Women's History Month. What's up? I'm Ariana. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're not, welcome back and thank you. Today, I'm going to be talking about folklore because I am not just an author. I am not just a total and complete nerd about writing and all things books. I am also a huge fan of folklore. And because of that, I love to talk about folklore. So why not? Right? If this is your kind of thing, if this sounds like something that you would enjoy, please make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that people find me. It helps me find the people that love me, and I need more love. Who doesn't? Anyway, let's go ahead and start talking about the women in folklore. So before we get into that, I did want to kind of talk about how women are usually used in folklore. It's kind of interesting to look at, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in depth at the end. But just as you're listening to this, pay attention to how these creatures come to be, to what their usage is in every story, to how things generally tend to end for them. It's very interesting, and it's something that I think you can find in well-known fairy tales like Hans Christian Andersen's Little Mermaid, the original, not the Disney, for example, or even just in unknown stories like the ones that I'm going to be telling you. And I shouldn't say unknown, barely known, same thing. So we're going to just jump right into it. We're going to start with one from Slavic folklore, and that is the Rusalka. Also want to point out, I am an ugly American. So if I say something wrong, please know that I tried my best. Don't yell at me. Anyway, the Rusalka. The Rusalka is originally from Slavic folklore as far as we know, but there are French and German counterparts. They're essentially seen as the answer to the mermaid. They're very, very similar in a lot of different ways, except where the mermaid is kind of more tied to the siren and is generally accepted as a creature that just lives in the water and thrives in the water. The Rusalka actually starts out as human. And while a lot of what I'm about to be telling you guys is going to sound like malevolent spirits, it's going to sound like kind of creepy, scary, bad girls. Actually, in the very beginning, in Slavic folklore, specifically Slavic paganism, the Rusalka actually started out as benevolent spirits that were known to come out of the water around springtime to deliver water to crops to start them growing so that they would be fully grown by harvest season. Post-19th century, though, because we're all a bunch of sad sacks, the story changed. And the Rusalka actually became what happens when a young woman ends her life in the water, either because of sadness connected to a bad relationship or due to being murdered by someone in the water. The most important thing is that she drowns, and she drowns with heaviness on her heart and in her soul. Once that happens, they become a Rusalka. So the interesting thing about Rusalka and folklore too is that they can't seem to decide whether they're a malevolent spirit or an undead thing. Some will call them spirits and some will call them undead. It just really depends. Maybe spirits are undead? I don't know. I always kind of felt like they were dead and they walked through things, like that's the whole point. Is never mind. The point being that whether they are a spirit or whether they are an undead, it is agreed upon that the way that you bring a Rusalka back into the benevolent part of the spirit world where you let them pass in peace is you figure out a way to avenge their death. However you make their death feel avenged, whatever that involves, you basically are able to help that spirit pass into whatever the next life is peacefully, and they are no longer a Rusalka. Up until then, they basically live in the water and raise hell and drive everybody in their general vicinity insane, including the men, especially the men. Actually, the way that they while away their time when they're not flipping boats and singing songs and destroying everybody's sleep at night is finding some man who is open to being seduced They seduce him, get him into the water with her, and then turn their body slick so that the man cannot hold on to them, and then they drown because nobody took swimming lessons, I guess, after the 19th century in the Slavic region. And my favorite part here is that apparently, depending on the legends that you read, sometimes the Rusalka kill their prey by tickling them to death. You know, I feel like that's probably the weirdest way to die I've ever heard. And in fact, in my notes, I wrote, some may tickle them to death, in parentheses, weird. It is really, really hard, actually, to find folktales, individual folktales about the Rusalki. It reminds me a lot of when I was talking about the Sihuapa in past videos. I mentioned that finding individual stories was really hard. It was like they had become so popular and so prevalent in everyday legend that really the stories you would hear would be things like, my cousin was fishing in the river and he saw a Sihuapa while he was out there. You don't really hear a lot of like long told oral stories about the Rusalka. The closest I could find was really just on Wikipedia, and it says that it is a Simbursk legend about one who's named Marina, and that Marina was in love with this man named Ivan, and I guess maybe the local store was sold out of Valentine's Day cards, or he wasn't answering the door when she knocked, I don't know, but rather than just trying to talk to Ivan, she drowned herself in absolute depression about not having Ivan's love. As she lived in the river, she would do things to spend her time, usually flipping over boats and kind of cavorting with other creatures that lived in the nearby river. And then eventually Ivan fell in love and married someone else. And Marina, still not quite understanding that a lot of this was her own fault, got very, very upset and decided that she was going to use her newfound Rusalka powers to attract or seduce Ivan. And then eventually she talked him into moving into the water with her, and that is where he drowned, and supposedly they lived together forever. Happily ever after? Kind of a sad story, really. The Rusalka to me are such a sad story. And there's another one that we'll be talking about who is also a sad creature. And it's just kind of interesting to see how that sadness is very quickly turned in upon itself to become anger and vengeance and pain dealt towards others. Next off is one that a lot of people probably wouldn't expect. And as I was doing my research, I didn't expect it either, but I find it really fascinating. And it's the Sphinx. So a lot of us, if we hear Sphinx, we think of the Great Sphinx structure in Egypt. And that is actually very interesting in that the Sphinx did start in Africa. And originally the creature was male and was widely accepted to simply be a wise figure meant to protect tombs and important structures. That was his job. And then the Greeks took that character and actually kept his African background, saying that he came from Ethiopia, but they changed the Sphinx to a she, to a woman. And otherwise, structurally, she was the same. She was the face of a woman, haunches of a lion, wings of an eagle. Her job was actually not as a guardian, but as a deliverer of vengeance on behalf of, depending on the one that you read, it would be either Hera or the god of war, Ares. Depends on who you're talking to. For whatever reason, they were angry because the king of Thebes died on his way to the Oracle of Delphi. And they were so angry about this that they installed the Sphinx at the head of Thebes, and her job was to kill the youth of Thebes if they could not solve her riddle. And apparently this was like the world's hardest riddle because she killed a lot of people, to the point where the kind of interim regent of Thebes was like, If somebody will come and solve this riddle and get rid of this stupid thing, I will deliver to you the kingdom. You will get to become king of Thebes, and I will give you the hand of Queen Jocasta. And there was this whole thing where a lot of people tried and failed. And then eventually the one who showed up was Oedipus. For those of you who are not initiated, Jocasta is Oedipus's mom. And he showed up to receive her hand in marriage. I'm just gonna pause for a minute so you can take that in. To be fair, he didn't know. Anyway, what the riddle is depends on who's telling the story, but the most popular version is what has 4 legs, but then has 2 legs, but then has 3 legs. And the answer is man, because we crawl and then we walk on 2 legs, and then we eventually walk with a cane. The other one is what is 2 women are sisters, but they give birth to one another again and again. What is it? The answer is day and night. Either way, the way that the story goes is Oedipus solved the riddle and actually knocked the Sphinx so off of her game that she just threw herself over the side of the cliff and ended it all. Oedipus saved Thebes, got to marry his mommy, and everybody's happy. That's how we know the Sphinx, and it's super, super fascinating to kind of hear about how, rather than being this big, strong protector that Egypt came to know her as, or at the time him as, she was completely gender bent and then made into a dangerous, angry creature of God's vengeance. And it's very interesting to think of, why did we change her from a man to a woman? Why did we take this from Africa in the first place? Why did the job of the Sphinx go from protecting those who were passing into the next life into something of a creature of death and fear? It's a very fascinating change between the two sources of myth and folklore. And I would love to say that I have any idea as to why. All I've got is the Greeks were weird. If anybody else has a guess, please, for the love of God, share. I would love to hear what you think. And finally, we go to Japan. Probably one of my favorite places to read about folklore. Honestly, if I had to say, my top 3 would be West Africa, Native American, and then Japanese. And the Japanese have a ghost for everything. And I'm not entirely certain why, but it's so incredibly interesting. And the one that I wanted to talk about today is the Yuki-Onna. I believe I said that right. The Yuki-Onna actually has about 7 names, but all of them have to do with snow, and they kind of all turn into some version of snow woman. There's like snow nanny, snow hag, snow whatever, but it all has to do with snow. Honestly, the complete antithesis to the Rusalka is the Yuki-Onna, in that I was able to find so many stories about the Yuki-Onna that I did not know which one to go with first. Depending on the region of Japan, you get a different idea of what she's like pretty much every time. Sometimes she's just this, not weak, but very meek version of a woman who is beautiful and seductive, but also afraid of angering her husband and not at all impervious to heat. For example, in the Ojia region, there's a story of a woman who marries a man but refuses to bathe. And he's kind of like, that's gross, get in the bath. And he forces her into the bath and gets in and melts, essentially, and only leaves behind a few icicles in her wake. In the Kaminoyama region of Japan, on the other hand, the Yuki-Onna is known as a woman who often stands out in blizzards holding a child, and the child is usually a winter sprite or winter spirit of its own. And what she will do is, anybody who's walking past, she will try to compel you to hug the child. If you hug the child, then you will start to feel heavier and heavier until you are covered in snow and you freeze to death. If you say no, she kicks your ass into a snowy field and you freeze to death anyway. So essentially, just don't go out during a blizzard, which you really shouldn't be doing anyway. I think that's kind of the point. The one thing that I did find very interesting, because it was pretty much agreed upon across legends, is that the Yuki-Onna is a protector of children, and actually very protective of children, is often seen with a child and does not take kindly to people being unkind to children. There's actually even one story of a guy who was bragging about how cool it would be to hook up with a Yuki-Onna, and then the woman talking to him is like, I'm a Yuki-Onna and I would kill you, except there's a kid standing in between us, but nothing better ever happened to that kid. And then she disappears. I'm not quite sure what that one's trying to teach, but it's a very interesting story in that she has no problem wasting men, but she will not hurt a child. In terms of where the Yuki-Onna come from, that is also not agreed upon. Some people say that it is as simple as that they are the spirit of a woman who died in the snow. Very similar to the Rusalka. They froze, they died in the snow, and now they return to haunt the point where they died, or to haunt the very environment where they died. But there are other legends that suggest that it's something a lot more ethereal. In the Oguni region, they actually believe that the Yuki-Onna started out as a princess that lived on the moon. And she got bored, and she was like, you know what would be fun is to go to Earth, because for some reason she figured that this place would be much cooler than the moon. But she escaped down here with the snow. And then, unfortunately, she couldn't get back up. So now, anytime that the snow shows up, she shows up. And then what she does to you, what your punishment is for crossing paths with her, is also not quite agreed upon. In some cases, she is actually more often used as a sign of depression, usually saying, hey, you know, the Yuki-Onna is what people hear who are depressed or old and alone during blizzards and who are looking forward to death. They hear the knock of the Yuki-Onna, and that's why you will find them dead the following morning. Some believe that they are vampiric, and so they suck your blood. Some believe that they're more like succubi, and so they suck something else. Some believe that it's as simple as she touches you and you freeze. So this is a perfect example of a story of folklore evolving and changing and growing according to this giant, decades, eons long version of telephone, to the point where we don't really know anymore if there even is any truth to the story, where she comes from, what this is about. We don't really know. All we know is that there are multiple different versions of her and multiple different ways to look at her. And so before I close up, two things. The first is that I find that women are often used in folklore as either protectors or utter destruction. And often the utter destruction is of man. And I don't want to say that it's 100% based in misogyny, because I'm sure that it's not. But it is very fascinating to look at these stories and to consistently see how a woman was expected to die to teach a lesson, or that she was often going to meet her ruin at the hands of either the one she loved or at her own hands, because love was painful or because giving love was painful. It's also very fascinating to see that there is this undercurrent of fear, I think, in a lot of folklore that has to do with women, especially female demons or female protectors, that there is this fear of really angering a woman to the point where she would cut you down, which suggests to me that there really might have been an underlying understanding that women were people, and as any people would, they could only take that mistreatment for so long before there was punishment. And sometimes I like to think that for things like the Yuki-Onna or the Rusalka, that maybe these were legends started by women because a lot of these women lived during times where it wasn't okay for a woman to stand up for herself or to be strong or to be outspoken, not without punishment, not without being looked down upon. And so these stories were a way for these women to get vengeance on people who hurt them or to reclaim their own power. And I'm not saying that that's definitely what happened. I don't know. But I think that it's a very interesting thought. You know, why do we see this constant undercurrent in these things of women being destroyed by love and then destroying others? Why do we see so many connections between a woman's pain and the suffering of the world around her? Like, what are we trying to say? Anyway, that's the first thing that I wanted to mention. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is, if you are watching this, you like the way that I tell stories in a completely different way at my brand new Patreon. These stories are purposely badly written romance stories, and I'm quite proud of them. Every single one of them has made me laugh, and I don't laugh at my own stuff. So I think that, you know, if you're looking to laugh, this might be worth it to check out. It helps support me, it helps support the channel, and it helps keep me writing. So if that's something that you're interested in, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for being here for this video. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in February. It was a rough month for me, and I hope to see you there for that. Thanks very much. See you in the next video.